The morning had started with such promise. Soo-yeon stood in the bridal suite of Seoul's Grand Plaza Hotel, surrounded by the gentle rustle of her white dress and the excited whispers of her bridesmaids. Her mother had just finished adjusting her veil, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. The wedding coordinator had confirmed everything was perfect: the flowers, the music, the carefully crafted menu that Soo-yeon had personally designed. As a chef, she couldn't help but ensure every detail of the reception dinner would be memorable. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The first sign that something was wrong came 45 minutes before the ceremony. Min-ho, her fiancé, wasn't answering his phone. His best man wore an increasingly worried expression as each call went straight to voicemail. Soo-yeon felt the first tremor of anxiety in her stomach, but pushed it aside. Min-ho was probably just stuck in traffic, or maybe his phone had died. 20 minutes before the ceremony, the whispers started. Guests were getting restless in the chapel. The wedding coordinator's professional smile began to crack. Soo-yeon's father paced outside the bridal suite, his phone pressed against his ear as he tried to reach Min-ho's parents. 10 minutes before the ceremony should have started, Min-ho's mother burst into the bridal suite, her face ashen. She held a hastily written note in her trembling hands. Soo-yeon didn't need to read it to understand. The look of shame and horror on her almost mother-in-law's face said everything. The next hour passed in a blur of humiliation and chaos. The wedding coordinator efficiently managed the crowd, explaining that the ceremony was canceled. Soo-yeon sat motionless in the bridal suite, still wearing her perfect white dress, as friends and family members filtered in and out with words of comfort that felt like sandpaper against her raw emotions. The note, when she finally read it, was brief and cruel in its simplicity. Min-ho wrote that he couldn't go through with it, that he'd had doubts for months, but hadn't known how to express them. He apologized for the timing, as if that somehow made his actions less devastating. He ended by saying she deserved someone who could love her completely, empty words that offered no real consolation. Later that evening, Soo-yeon stood in her apartment kitchen, still wearing her wedding dress. The carefully planned reception dinner would go to waste, hundreds of portions of her signature dishes, each one crafted to tell the story of her relationship with Min-ho. She looked at her reflection in the polished surface of her favorite copper pot. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger. Without conscious thought, she began to move through her kitchen, her hands finding comfort in familiar motions. She pulled out ingredients, heated her beloved wok, and began to cook. Tears streamed down her face as she chopped onions with precise, professional movements. The rhythmic sound of her knife against the cutting board became a meditation. For hours, she cooked dish after dish, filling her kitchen with the aromas of gochugaru, sesame oil, and simmering broths. She cooked until her tears ran dry, until her arms ached, until the sun began to rise over Seoul's skyline. The food she prepared wasn't meant for anyone to eat. It was therapy, a way to process her pain through the one thing she truly understood. As dawn broke, Soo-yeon made a decision. She couldn't control whether someone would love her, but she could control what she did with her passion for cooking. She called Chef Park at Le Ciel, one of Seoul's most prestigious restaurants. She'd turned down his job offer months ago, choosing instead to focus on wedding planning. This time, when he answered, she accepted the position without hesitation. In the following weeks, Soo-yeon threw herself into work with singular focus. She arrived at Le Ciel before dawn each day, perfecting her techniques, learning from Chef Park's decades of experience. She stayed late into the night, experimenting with new combinations, pushing herself to create dishes that spoke of something deeper than just flavor. Her colleagues whispered about her intensity, her dedication that bordered on obsession. But in the kitchen, Soo-yeon found something she'd lost: control, purpose, and most importantly, a sense of self that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. Each perfectly executed dish became a small victory, a step further away from the humiliation of that day. 3 months after the wedding that never was, Soo-yeon was promoted to sous chef. She stood in Le Ciel's kitchen, holding the official announcement, and realized she hadn't thought about Min-ho in weeks. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it no longer defined her. Instead, what defined her was the confidence in her hands as they moved through each preparation, the respect in Chef Park's eyes when he tasted her new creations, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she was becoming someone stronger than the bride who had been left at the altar. Her mother still called daily, worried about her daughter's single status, and demanding to know when she would start dating again. Soo-yeon let these questions roll off her back like water from a hot wok. She had found her refuge in the precise measurements of recipes, in the discipline of mise en place, in the artistry of plating. Love might have failed her, but cooking never would. The Seoul Culinary Innovation Expo buzzed with activity as chefs, restaurateurs, and food industry executives mingled among elaborate displays of cutting-edge kitchen equipment and innovative ingredients. Soo-yeon stood behind her demonstration station, making final adjustments to her presentation. After 18 months at Le Ciel, Chef Park had chosen her to represent the restaurant at this prestigious event. The dish she planned to present wasn't the kind of haute cuisine Le Ciel was known for. Instead, she had chosen something deeply personal, a modern interpretation of her grandmother's sundubu jjigae. The soft tofu stew had been her comfort food throughout childhood, and she'd spent months perfecting a version that maintained its soul-warming qualities while elevating it to fine dining status. As she worked, Soo-yeon noticed a tall figure lingering at the edge of her station. Unlike the other attendees who moved quickly from display to display, this man seemed content to watch her methodical preparations. She recognized him vaguely from business magazines, Jun-Suk Kim, CEO of one of Korea's fastest-growing food corporations. His company was known for taking traditional Korean dishes and making them accessible to modern consumers without sacrificing authenticity. When it came time for her demonstration, Soo-yeon's hands moved with practiced precision as she explained each step to the gathered crowd. She spoke about her grandmother's kitchen, about watching the elderly woman prepare this dish on cold mornings before school. As she added her innovative touches, a sous vide egg instead of the traditional raw one, homemade tofu infused with truffles, a deliberate balance of traditional gochugaru with imported Spanish paprika, she could feel Jun-Suk's intense focus. The audience responded enthusiastically to her presentation, but it was Jun-Suk who remained behind after others had moved on. He approached her station with genuine curiosity in his eyes. "The way you incorporated modern techniques while preserving the emotional core of the dish," he said, "it's exactly what we've been trying to achieve at Kim Foods." Soo-yeon felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at his praise, but kept her professional composure. She had learned the hard way not to let emotions interfere with her career. "Thank you, Mr. Kim. Your company's work in modernizing traditional cuisine is well known in the industry. Please call me Jun-Suk." He picked up one of her business cards from the display. "You know, food is more than just sustenance or even art. It's memory, emotion, connection. Your presentation reminded me of my own grandmother's cooking." As they talked, Soo-yeon found herself drawn into a conversation about the role of food in Korean culture and its evolution in the modern world. Jun-Suk spoke with passion about preserving traditional flavors while making them accessible to younger generations who might otherwise lose touch with their culinary heritage. "We're developing a new line of premium ready meals," he explained, his enthusiasm evident. "Not the usual convenience store fare, but restaurant-quality dishes that busy professionals can prepare at home. We want to capture the essence of dishes like yours, food that tells a story, that carries emotional resonance." Soo-yeon understood immediately what he meant. In her work at Le Ciel, she often saw young professionals who couldn't cook the dishes their parents and grandparents had made, who were losing touch with their food heritage in the rush of modern life. "It's a worthwhile goal," she admitted, "though challenging to execute without compromising quality." "That's exactly why I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration." Jun-Suk's proposal came naturally, as if it were the obvious conclusion to their conversation. "We need someone with your understanding of both traditional techniques and modern innovation. Someone who can translate emotion into flavor." The offer caught Soo-yeon off guard. She had been content at Le Ciel, safe in the structured environment of a professional kitchen. This opportunity would mean stepping into unknown territory, taking risks she wasn't sure she was ready for. The memory of the last time she'd taken a leap of faith still stung. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I'm very happy with my current position. The words felt rehearsed, a protective barrier she'd learned to maintain. Jun-suk smiled, not discouraged by her hesitation. Of course. But consider this. What if you could share your grandmother's sundubujigi with thousands of people? Help them create those same warm memories you spoke about. He handed her his business card. Think about it. We could start with a consulting arrangement, see how it develops. As the expo continued around them, Soo-yeon found herself holding his card, feeling its weight in her hand. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons to decline: her secure position at Lucille, the risks of change, the danger of working closely with someone who stirred unexpected feelings. But another part of her, the part that had fallen in love with cooking in the first place, recognized the opportunity to make a different kind of impact. Her work at Lucille reached only those who could afford fine dining. This could be a chance to share her passion more widely, to help preserve the culinary traditions she valued so deeply. I'll think about it, she finally said, tucking his card into her chef's coat pocket. The warmth of his smile suggested he heard the unspoken interest in her voice. As Jun-suk walked away, Soo-yeon turned back to cleaning her station, trying to ignore the way her heart had quickened during their conversation. She had built her walls carefully after Minho, focusing all her energy on her craft. Now, somehow, a simple conversation about food had made those walls feel just a little less secure. After 2 weeks of careful consideration and a lengthy discussion with Chef Park, Soo-yeon agreed to work with Kim Foods as a consultant while maintaining her position at Lucille. She arrived at the company's research and development kitchen in Gangnam on a crisp Monday morning, her knife bag slung over her shoulder and her grandmother's recipe notebook tucked safely in her bag. The R&D kitchen was a stark contrast to Lucille's traditional setup. Everything gleamed with industrial efficiency, state-of-the-art equipment lined the walls, and the central island featured built-in induction burners and digital temperature controls. Jun-suk waited for her, dressed not in the expected business suit but in casual clothes with an apron already tied around his waist. I hope you don't mind, he said, gesturing to his attire, but I like to be hands-on with new projects. I find it helps me understand the process better. There was something disarming about seeing a CEO ready to get his hands dirty in the kitchen, and Soo-yeon felt some of her professional guardedness slip. They began with a review of Kim Foods' current product line. Soo-yeon appreciated their attention to quality, but noticed opportunities for improvement. The bulgogi sauce is good, she noted, tasting it thoughtfully, but it's missing depth. The kind of depth that comes from someone's mother adding just a bit more pear juice, or aging the soy sauce longer. Jun-suk listened intently, taking notes as she explained the subtle differences between commercial production and home cooking. As they worked, he shared stories about his own experiences with food. When I was young, he said while they waited for a test batch of marinade to rest, my father was always working. My mother too. The only time we really connected as a family was during meals. The confession caught Soo-yeon off guard. In the corporate world of Seoul, it was rare for someone in his position to show such vulnerability. She found herself sharing in return. Food was my safe space too. When my parents argued, I would hide in my grandmother's kitchen. She taught me that cooking isn't just about recipes, it's about healing. Their conversation flowed naturally as they worked, testing different variations of traditional dishes. Jun-suk proved to be more skilled in the kitchen than she expected, his knife work precise and his palate refined. When she commented on it, a shadow passed over his face. My father wanted me to be a chef, he revealed, focusing intently on the scallions he was chopping. He was a celebrated restaurateur before he passed away. But I saw how the pressure of maintaining his reputation affected him, how it consumed him. I chose a different path, but I never lost my love for cooking. The personal nature of his confession hung in the air between them. Soo-yeon recognized the weight of unspoken expectations, the complexity of family relationships. She thought about sharing her own story, about Minho, about the wedding that never was, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she redirected their attention to the task at hand, suggesting adjustments to the soy garlic sauce they were developing. As weeks passed, they fell into a comfortable routine. 3 days a week, Soo-yeon would arrive at the R&D kitchen early in the morning. They would spend hours testing recipes, adjusting seasonings, and discussing ways to translate traditional techniques into scalable processes. Jun-suk proved to be a respectful collaborator, valuing her expertise while contributing his own insights about market demands and consumer preferences. But it wasn't all business. During lunch breaks, they would sometimes sample their test dishes together, sharing stories and laughing over cooking mishaps. Jun-suk had a way of making her feel at ease, of drawing out the personality she usually kept hidden behind her professional facade. One afternoon, as they worked on perfecting a modern version of japchae, Jun-suk asked about her grandmother's notebook. Soo-yeon hesitated. She had never shown it to anyone outside her family. But something in his genuine interest made her want to share. She carefully opened the worn pages, explaining the notations in her grandmother's handwriting, the little adjustments and secrets passed down through generations. "This," she said, pointing to a particular note, "is why our family's kimchi was different." Grandmother would add a tiny bit of Asian pear juice to the paste. Most people wouldn't notice it consciously, but it created a subtle sweetness that balanced the heat. Jun-suk leaned closer to examine the page, his shoulder brushing against hers. The contact was brief, but electric, sending a jolt of awareness through Soo-yeon that had nothing to do with culinary expertise. She stepped away quickly, busying herself with adjusting the heat under their test batch of noodles. The moment passed, but its effect lingered. As they continued working, Soo-yeon found herself increasingly aware of Jun-suk's presence, the way he moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence, the thoughtful expression he wore while tasting their creations, the gentle way he handled her grandmother's recipes with reverence. Yet every time these feelings surfaced, Soo-yeon pushed them down. She had built her new life on the foundation of professional success, not emotional vulnerability. The memory of standing alone in her wedding dress served as a constant reminder of the risks of opening her heart. But as they wrapped up another successful testing session, Jun-suk's genuine smile and warm praise made her walls feel increasingly fragile. She gathered her things quickly, making an excuse about needing to prepare for dinner service at Le Ciel. In the elevator down to the lobby, Soo-yeon pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat race beneath her chef's coat. She had sworn to focus only on her career, yet here she was, fighting against feelings she hadn't planned for and wasn't sure she was ready to face. The weekly family dinner at her parents' apartment in Apgujeong had become an exercise in patience for Soo-yeon. She sat at the familiar dining table, the same one where she had done her homework as a child, while her mother served traditional dishes that carried the weight of unspoken expectations. "I ran into Mrs. Park at the market today," her mother began, carefully arranging banchan dishes on the table. "Her son just made partner at his law firm. She asked about you." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Mrs. Park's son had been one of many potential suitors her mother had suggested over the past 2 years. Soo-yeon focused on serving herself a portion of doenjang jjigae, the familiar smell of the soybean paste stew reminding her of simpler times. "I'm sure Mrs. Park was delighted to share her son's success," she replied neutrally, having learned that engagement was safer than confrontation. Her father sat quietly, as he always did during these conversations, hidden behind his evening newspaper. Only the slight tightening of his grip on the pages betrayed his awareness of the tension building between his wife and daughter. "You know, being a chef is admirable," her mother continued, her tone carefully measured. "But you're 32 now, Soo-yeon. Your career is established. It's time to think about your future." The words "your future" clearly meant marriage, family, and all the traditional markers of success that her mother valued. The soup suddenly tasted bitter in Soo-yeon's mouth. "I am thinking about my future, Mom. The collaboration with Kim Foods could lead to national distribution. My recipes could reach thousands of homes." She tried to convey her excitement about the project, about working with Jun-suk, about the possibility of making traditional Korean cuisine accessible to a new generation. Her mother's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth.
Kim Foods?
The company run by that young CEO. There was a new note of interest in her voice that made Soo-yeon instantly wary. "I read about him in the society pages. His family has quite a reputation in the restaurant industry." "It's a professional relationship," Soo-yeon said firmly, already regretting mentioning Jun-suk. We're developing new product lines based on traditional recipes. She didn't mention their easy conversations, the way he understood her passion for preserving culinary heritage, or how his presence made her heart race in ways she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. A CEO would be a much better match than that chef who left you, her mother mused, ignoring Soo-yeon's attempt to keep the conversation professional. At least he would understand the value of stability and family obligations. The casual reference to Minho hit Soo-yeon like a physical blow. She set down her spoon, her appetite vanishing. Mom, please. I've told you I'm not interested in dating right now. My work at Lucille and the consulting project are taking all my time. That's exactly the problem. Her mother's careful composure finally cracked. You hide in that kitchen, working impossible hours, avoiding any chance at real happiness. Do you think I enjoy watching my only daughter turn into a workaholic? That I don't worry about you being alone. I'm not alone, Soo-yeon protested. I have my career, my colleagues, my friends. Friends can't take care of you when you're old, her mother interrupted. A successful career won't give you children to carry on our family's traditions. Those recipes you're so proud of. Who will you pass them to if you don't have a family of your own? The question struck deeper than her mother probably intended. Soo-yeon had asked herself the same thing late at night when she reviewed her grandmother's recipe notebook. The precious annotations and food-stained pages represented generations of family history. Was she betraying that legacy by choosing career over family? Her father finally lowered his newspaper. Yobo, he said quietly to his wife, let Soo-yeon eat in peace. But the damage was done. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence, broken only by the clink of chopsticks against dishes. Later that night, in her own apartment, Soo-yeon stood in her kitchen, unable to sleep. She pulled out her grandmother's notebook, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. Her grandmother had been both a devoted wife and mother and an incredible cook who passed her knowledge to the next generation. Was it really impossible to have both? She thought about Jun-suk, about how naturally they worked together in the kitchen, how he respected both tradition and innovation. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where career and love weren't mutually exclusive choices. But then the memory of standing alone in her wedding dress surfaced, and she closed the notebook firmly. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jun-suk about tomorrow's testing schedule. Looking at his name on the screen, Soo-yeon felt the familiar conflict between her growing feelings and her fear of vulnerability. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Who would she pass these recipes to? She put her phone away without responding, but sleep remained elusive. In the quiet of her apartment, the question that had been haunting her became impossible to ignore. Was she choosing to be alone because it was what she wanted, or because she was afraid to risk being left again? The answer, she realized, was not as clear as she had been pretending it was. The text message from Jun-suk arrived on a Friday afternoon while Soo-yeon was preparing for dinner service at Lucille. I'd like to show you something special. Can you meet me at the R&D kitchen tomorrow evening at 7? She hesitated before responding, her mother's words still echoing in her mind, but professional curiosity won out. She texted back a brief confirmation. When Soo-yeon arrived at the Kim Foods building the next evening, the usually bustling office tower stood quiet. The security guard nodded in recognition as she made her way to the elevator. The R&D kitchen's lights were dimmed when she entered, but the space had been transformed. The industrial workspace now featured a careful, LY-set table for two, complete with elegant place settings and flickering candles. Jun-suk emerged from behind the professional cooking station, wearing not his usual casual clothes, but a crisp chef's jacket. Welcome, he said, his smile warm in the candlelight. I hope you don't mind, but I thought it was time I cooked for you for a change. The familiar kitchen now felt intimate, almost dangerous. Soo-yeon's instinct was to retreat, to maintain the professional boundaries she'd carefully constructed. But the enticing aromas coming from the cooking station made her pause. She recognized complex layers of familiar scents, soy, ginger, garlic, but combined in ways that sparked her professional interest. Please sit. Jun-suk gestured to the table. This dinner tells a story. our story through food. He moved back to the cooking station with practiced ease, and Soo-yeon realized this evening had been carefully planned. The first course arrived, a modern interpretation of the sundubu jjigae she'd presented at the expo where they first met. But Jun-suk had added his own touches. The tofu was cut into precise cubes, each one perfectly seared on one side, floating in a clarified version of the traditional broth. "Your grandmother's recipe inspired this," he explained. "I spent weeks practicing to get the balance right." Soo-yeon tasted it carefully, her chef's palate analyzing the technical execution even as the familiar flavors brought back memories of their first conversation. The dish was expertly crafted, showing both respect for tradition and creative innovation, much like their working relationship. Each subsequent course represented a milestone in their collaboration. There was japchae made with glass noodles they had spent days perfecting for mass production, but here elevated with seasonal vegetables and a sauce that captured the essence of their experimental batches. The bulgogi featured the marinade they had developed together, but using premium Hanwoo beef and garnished with microgreens from Jun-suk's personal garden. As they ate, conversation flowed naturally between them, touching on shared memories of recipe development sessions and funny kitchen mishaps. Jun-suk revealed the stories behind each dish, showing how deeply he had observed their time together, how much attention he had paid to every detail of their interactions. "Do you remember when we accidentally added too much gochugaru to that test batch?" he asked, laughing as he served the next course. "Your face turned as red as the sauce, but you insisted on tasting every variation to find the perfect balance." Soo-yeon found herself relaxing despite her initial reservations. There was something disarming about seeing this powerful CEO so completely in his element in the kitchen. He moved with the confidence of someone who truly understood food, not just as a business, but as an art form, a means of connection. The main course was a revelation, a deconstructed version of her family's sacred kimchi recipe. Jun-suk had taken the components, the napa cabbage, the chili paste, the fermented shrimp, and transformed them into a sophisticated dish that somehow maintained the soul of the original. "I hope I did your grandmother's recipe justice," he said softly, watching as she took her first bite. The flavors brought tears to her eyes, not because they perfectly replicated her grandmother's kimchi, but because they honored its essence while creating something new. It was a perfect metaphor for what they had been trying to achieve with their collaboration, bridging tradition and innovation, past and present. As they finished the meal, Jun-suk served a dessert that wasn't on any of their development lists, a delicate hariak filled with a brown sugar and nut mixture that he admitted was his mother's recipe. "Food is memory," he said, echoing their first conversation. "But it's also possibility, a chance to create new mimer. Yes, new traditions." The intimacy of the moment terrified Soo-yeon. Every carefully crafted dish spoke of attention, understanding, and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. The professional boundaries she had maintained were blurring, replaced by something far more dangerous: hope. Looking at Jun-suk in the candlelight, she saw not just the successful CEO or the skilled cook, but a man who understood her in a way few others had. He knew the language of food that she spoke, respected the traditions she valued, and shared her vision of preserving Korean culinary heritage while embracing change. But as the evening drew to a close, fear crept back in. The last time she had allowed herself to hope, to dream of a future that combined love and career, she had ended up alone in a wedding dress. The memories served as a cold reminder of the risks of opening her heart. Yet when Jun-suk walked her to her car, the gentle way he said goodnight made her walls tremble. In the safety of her vehicle, Soo-yeon pressed her hands against the steering wheel, trying to steady her racing heart. She had come to this dinner expecting a professional meeting. She left with the unsettling realization that somewhere between the carefully crafted courses and shared memories, her carefully constructed defenses had begun to crack. The announcement for the National Korean Cuisine Innovation Competition arrived at Lucille on a busy Tuesday morning. Chef Park handed Soo-yeon the glossy brochure with a knowing look. The grand prize includes a chance to showcase Korean cuisine at the International Culinary Summit in Paris, he said, watching her reaction carefully. "You should enter." Soo-yeon's initial instinct was to decline. The competition would require weeks of preparation, and she was already juggling her responsibilities at Lucille with the Kim Foods project. But as she read through the competition guidelines, something caught her attention. This year's theme was Tradition Reimagined, exactly what she and Jun Suk had been working on for months. The memory of their intimate dinner 2 weeks ago surfaced unbidden. They had maintained professional distance since that evening, both tacitly agreeing to focus on work. Yet every time they tested a new recipe, every time their hands accidentally brushed while plating a dish, Soo-yeon felt the walls she'd built beginning to crumble. After her shift ended, she found herself calling Jun Suk. "I need your opinion on something professional," she said, emphasizing the last word. They agreed to meet at the R&D kitchen, which had been restored to its usual clinical efficiency since that candlelit dinner. Jun Suk listened intently as she explained the competition requirements. Participants would need to present 3 courses that demonstrated both mastery of traditional Korean cuisine and innovative techniques. The preliminary round would focus on technical skills, while the finals would require contestants to create dishes that told a personal story. "You should absolutely compete," Jun Suk said without hesitation. "Your ability to honor tradition while creating something new is exactly what they're looking for." His confidence in her abilities made her chest tight with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "But the timing," she protested. "We're in the middle of finalizing the new product line. I couldn't ask you to pause the project while I prepare for a competition." Jun Suk's expression softened. "Soo-yeon, this is an incredible opportunity. Our project will still be here after the competition. In fact," he hesitated, then continued, "let me help you prepare. You can use the R&D kitchen after hours for practice. We have equipment here that Lucille doesn't." The offer was generous. Too generous. "I couldn't impose Dash. It's not an imposition," he interrupted. "Consider it an investment in our project's future. Your success would bring attention to exactly the kind of cuisine we're trying to develop." His logic was sound, but Soo-yeon sensed dangerous territory ahead. Spending more time with Jun Suk, especially during the vulnerable process of competition preparation, would make it harder to maintain professional boundaries. Yet the opportunity was too significant to pass up. The next few weeks became a blur of intense preparation. During the day, Soo-yeon maintained her duties at Lucille while working on the Kim Foods project. In the evenings, she experimented with competition dishes in the R&D kitchen. Jun Suk was often there, offering feedback and support, his presence both comforting and unsettling. As the preliminary round approached, self-doubt began to creep in. Soo-yeon found herself second-guessing every decision, every flavor combination. The pressure of the competition merged with her unresolved feelings for Jun Suk, creating a storm of anxiety she struggled to control. One evening, after a particularly frustrating practice session where nothing seemed to work right, she nearly burst into tears over a failed batch of modernized tteokbokki. The rice cakes had refused to maintain their structure after being subjected to her experimental cooking method. "Stop," Jun Suk said firmly, placing his hands over hers as she aggressively chopped another batch of ingredients. "You're overthinking it. Remember what you told me about your grandmother's cooking? How she never measured ingredients, but knew exactly what each dish needed." "That was different," Soo-yeon protested. "She had years of experience, Dash, and you have your own experience," he countered. "I've watched you cook for months now. When you trust your instincts, your food is incredible. It's only when you let fear take over that things go wrong." His words hit uncomfortably close to home. Was she letting her fear of failure, in both the competition and her personal life, affect her cooking? The parallel wasn't lost on her. Just as she had retreated into safe, traditional techniques when her experiments failed, she had retreated into professional distance when her feelings for Jun Suk threatened to overwhelm her. Looking down, she realized his hands were still covering hers on the cutting board. The contact sent warmth spreading up her arms, making it hard to concentrate. She stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional barriers she fought to maintain. "Maybe we should call it a night," she suggested, her voice unsteady. "It's getting late." Jun Suk watched her with an unreadable expression. "You can't run from every challenge, Soo-yeon. Sometimes you have to trust yourself enough to take risks, in cooking and in life." The words followed her home that night, echoing in her mind as she lay awake. The competition was less than a week away, and she felt increasingly uncertain about both her professional abilities and her emotional stability. Every practice session with Jun-suk made it harder to pretend their relationship was purely professional, yet his support had become essential to her competition preparation. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams mixed memories of her grandmother's kitchen with images of Jun-suk's hands guiding hers through unfamiliar techniques. In the hazy space between sleep and waking, one truth became clear. She was no longer just fighting for a competition victory. She was fighting against her own fears of vulnerability, both in her cooking and in her heart. The preliminary round of the competition transformed the Seoul Culinary Institute's main hall into a battlefield of sorts. 20 cooking stations were arranged in a horseshoe pattern, each equipped with identical professional equipment. The air hummed with the sound of exhaust fans and nervous energy as contestants set up their mise en place. Soo-yeon stood at station number 15, methodically arranging her ingredients. She had chosen to present a modernized version of galbijjim, braised short ribs that would showcase both traditional technique and innovative preparation. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but her mind kept returning to the judges' table, where 5 renowned Korean chefs sat watching the contestants' every move. The competition's head judge was Chef Kim Min-jae, famous for his uncompromising stance on traditional Korean cuisine. His restaurant in Insadong was known for refusing to alter traditional recipes, claiming that innovation often meant losing the soul of Korean food. As he passed by her station during the initial inspection, his eyes lingered on her sous vide machine with obvious disapproval. The first 2 hours of competition passed in a focused blur. Soo-yeon's movements were efficient, each step carefully planned during her practice sessions with Jun-suk. She had just begun plating when Chef Kim approached her station for the tasting evaluation. "Explain your dish," he commanded, his tone clipped and professional. Soo-yeon straightened her spine, channeling the confidence she developed at Lucille. "I've prepared galbijjim using traditional flavors, but modern techniques. The short ribs are cooked sous vide for 48 hours at precisely controlled temperature, allowing the collagen to break down while maintaining the meat's integrity. The braising liquid is clarified using a gelatin filtration method, then reduced to intensify the flavors. The traditional garnishes of chestnuts and dates are reimagined as a puree and gel, respectively." Chef Kim's expression remained impassive as he tasted the dish. The silence stretched uncomfortably as he made notes on his evaluation sheet. Finally, he looked up, his eyes sharp with criticism. "The technical execution is precise," he acknowledged, "but where is the soul? This could be served in any modern restaurant in Paris or New York. There's nothing distinctly Korean about it except the basic flavor profile. In trying to be innovative, you've lost the essence of what makes galbijjim comfort food. This is the kind of cooking that makes young people forget their culinary heritage." The words hit Soo-yeon like a physical blow. They echoed her mother's accusations about abandoning tradition, Minho's complaints that she was too focused on technical perfection rather than emotional connection. Her hands began to tremble as she gripped the edge of her workstation. "Your grandmother," Chef Kim continued, having read her biography and the competition materials, "was known for her traditional cooking. What would she think of this modern interpretation?" The mention of her grandmother made Soo-yeon's vision blur with unshed tears. She remembered countless Sunday afternoons watching her grandmother prepare galbijjim, the patient way she would tend to the bubbling pot, adjusting the heat and seasoning by instinct rather than precise measurement. Had Soo-yeon really strayed so far from those teachings in her pursuit of innovation? From the spectator area, Jun-suk watched with growing concern. He could see the moment Soo-yeon's confidence crumbled, recognizing the same fear and doubt that had plagued her during practice sessions. He wanted to rush to her defense, to explain how her modern techniques actually preserve the essence of traditional flavors, but he knew this was her battle to fight. The remaining judges completed their evaluations, but Soo-yeon barely registered their comments. When the preliminary round ended, she mechanically cleaned her station, her movements robotic. She was surprised to find Jun-suk waiting for her in the competitor's prep area, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "Walk with me," he said quietly, leading her away from the crowded competition hall to a small courtyard garden maintained by the Culinary Institute. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of herbs from the garden's planters. Chef Kim was wrong. Jun Suk stated firmly once the "Why we're alone." Innovation doesn't mean losing tradition. It means keeping it alive for a new generation. Your grandmother understood that. Why do you think she wrote down all those little adjustments in her notebook? She was innovating too in her own way. Soo-yeon sank onto a stone bench, emotional exhaustion finally overwhelming her. But what if he's right? What if I'm so focused on technique that I've forgotten the heart of Korean cooking? My mother always says I'm losing touch with our traditions, and now... Stop, Jun Suk interrupted, sitting beside her. Remember the first time you showed me your grandmother's notebook? You didn't just memorize her recipes. You understood why she made each choice, how she balanced flavors. That understanding is the real tradition you're preserving. He pulled something from his bag, her grandmother's notebook, which she'd left in the R&D kitchen during their last practice session. Look at this, he said, opening to a well-worn page. See how she noted that the Galbi gym needed more time in winter? She was adjusting for temperature variables, just like your sous vide method does. The tools are different, but the goal is the same, creating food that nourishes both body and soul. Soo-yeon took the notebook with trembling hands, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Cooking is living history. It changes with each generation while keeping its heart intact." For the final round, Jun Suk continued softly, "Don't cook what you think the judges want to see. Cook the food that tells your story, the story of a chef who honors her heritage by helping it evolve. That's what your grandmother would want to see." As darkness fell over the courtyard, Soo-yeon felt something shift inside her. The criticism still stung, but beneath the pain, she found a deeper understanding. Her journey from traditional home cooking to modern professional techniques wasn't a betrayal of her heritage. It was her way of ensuring its survival. Looking at Jun Suk in the gathering dusk, she realized he understood this truth in a way her mother and Chef Kim never could. Like her, he lived in the space between tradition and innovation, working to bridge the gap between past and future. For the first time since Minho's abandonment, she felt truly seen and understood. The finals of the National Korean Cuisine Innovation Competition began early on a misty Seoul morning. Only 5 contestants remained, each given 3 hours to present a dish that would tell their personal story through Korean cuisine. The stakes were higher now. The judging panel had expanded to include international culinary experts alongside Chef Kim, and the audience section was filled with food critics, industry professionals, and family members. Soo-yeon arrived at her station an hour early, her grandmother's notebook tucked safely in her chef's coat pocket. She had spent the week since the preliminary round completely reconceptualizing her approach. Instead of trying to prove her technical mastery, she had designed a dish that would bridge the gap between her grandmother's kitchen and her own culinary journey. Her mother sat in the front row of the audience section, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Next to her was Chef Park from Lucille, who had given her the day off to compete. Jun Suk stood at the back of the hall, his presence a quiet source of strength. When their eyes met briefly across the room, his encouraging smile carried the weight of all their shared moments in the R&D kitchen. As the competition began, Soo-yeon moved with deliberate purpose. She had chosen to present a dish she called 3 Generations of Kimchi, a plate that would showcase the evolution of her family's culinary heritage through 3 distinct preparations of Korea's most iconic dish. The first component would be her grandmother's traditional kimchi, made exactly as it appeared in the worn notebook, with its secret addition of Asian pear juice. Her hands worked from muscle memory as she mixed the seasoning paste, remembering countless afternoons spent helping her grandmother prepare the annual kimchi supply for their extended family. The second preparation represented her mother's adaptation of the recipe. During the lean years when Soo-yeon was young, her mother had modified the recipe to be more economical while maintaining its essential flavors. This version used cheaper vegetables but compensated with careful fermentation timing, a lesson in how necessity could drive innovation without sacrificing tradition. The final preparation would be Soo-yeon's own interpretation, incorporating both her professional training and her work with Jun Suk at Kim Foods. She used modern techniques to create kimchi-inspired elements, fermented cabbage compressed into delicate shapes, traditional seasonings transformed into ethereal foams and gels, and a kimchi-based broth clarified to crystal clarity while maintaining its complex flavors. As she worked, Soo-yeon could feel Chef Kim watching her closely. But this time, instead of anxiety, she felt a calm certainty in her approach. Each element of her dish carried not just flavor, but meaning, a story of how Korean cuisine could evolve while keeping its soul intact. The technical aspects of her presentation were precise, but now they served the story rather than overshadowing it. She used the sous vide to maintain exact temperatures for her fermented elements, molecular gastronomy techniques to capture the essence of traditional flavors, and classical French plating methods to showcase distinctly Korean ingredients. In the final minutes of competition, Soo-yeon began plating with the careful attention of someone assembling a family portrait. The 3 variations of kimchi were arranged to show their connection, each different in appearance, but carrying the same culinary DNA. She added final touches that connected the elements: drops of pear juice that her grandmother had always used, crystallized gochugaru that represented her mother's resourcefulness, and delicate herbs from the same varieties that grew in her childhood home's garden. When time was called, Soo-yeon stood behind her completed dishes, her heart pounding but her hands steady. As the judges approached her station, she took a deep breath and began to explain her concept. Her voice grew stronger as she shared not just the technical details, but the story behind each element: how her grandmother's kimchi had comforted her after school, how her mother's adaptations had taught her about resilience, and how her own innovations sought to carry these lessons forward. Chef Kim studied the dish intently, his expression unreadable. He tasted each preparation methodically, making notes between bites. The international judges followed, their murmured conversations impossible to interpret. Soo-yeon waited, remembering Jun Suk's words about cooking from the heart rather than fear. Finally, Chef Kim looked up. His stern expression had softened almost imperceptibly. "This," he said slowly, "is innovation that honors tradition rather than replacing it." Each variation tells part of a larger story, and together they show how Korean cuisine can evolve without losing its essence. He paused, then added, "Your grandmother would be proud." The words washed over Soo-yeon like a blessing. She glanced at her mother in the audience and saw tears in her eyes, not of disappointment this time, but of understanding. Then her gaze found Jun Suk, who was beaming with unconcealed pride and something deeper that made her heart skip. As the judges moved on to the next contestant, Soo-yeon touched her grandmother's notebook through her chef's coat. She had done more than present a successful dish. She had found a way to honor her past while embracing her future, both in her cooking and in her heart. The competition results were still unknown, but she had already won something more valuable: the confidence to be fully herself, innovative yet respectful, modern yet rooted in tradition. The week following the competition passed in a whirlwind of media attention and professional recognition. Soo-yeon's innovative 3 generations of kimchi had not only won first place, but had also sparked widespread discussion about the evolution of Korean cuisine. Food magazines requested interviews, and Lucille's reservation list grew even longer as guests specifically requested her dishes. On a quiet Sunday evening, after the last dinner service had ended, Soo-yeon sat in Lucille's empty dining room, finally having a moment to process everything. The golden trophy from the competition sat on the table before her, its surface reflecting the dim kitchen lights. Chef Park had insisted on displaying it prominently in the restaurant's entrance, but she'd taken it down tonight to study it in private. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jun Suk. "Congratulations again. The Kim Foods board was impressed by how your competition dish aligned with our vision for the new product line. Would you like to discuss the next steps over dinner tomorrow?" The invitation made her pulse quicken. Since the competition, their interactions had been limited to brief professional exchanges. The project had continued moving forward, but something had shifted between them. Every time they met to discuss product development, the air felt charged with unspoken words and careful distances maintained. Soo-yeon's fingers hovered over the phone's keyboard. The professional thing would be to suggest meeting at the R&D kitchen or a public restaurant. Instead, she found herself typing, "Why don't you come to my place? I'll cook." His response came quickly. "I'd like that. What time?" The next evening, Soo-yeon's small apartment kitchen became a stage for another kind of performance. She had chosen to prepare a meal that represented her own journey, dishes that combined her grandmother's techniques with the innovations she'd developed working alongside Jun-suk. The menu was intimate, personal, nothing like the formal tastings they conducted at work. When Jun-suk arrived, he brought a bottle of wine and something else, a small, wrapped package. "This isn't a professional gift," he said carefully, placing it on her counter. "I found it at an antique market and thought of you." Soo-yeon unwrapped the package to find a vintage cookbook, its pages yellowed with age. Inside were handwritten notes from multiple generations of home cooks, each adding their own modifications to traditional recipes. Her throat tightened with emotion at the thoughtfulness of the gift. As they cooked together in her small kitchen, so different from the spacious R&D facility they were used to, the careful professional distance they'd maintained began to crumble. Their hands brushed as they reached for ingredients. Their bodies moved in an unconscious dance of coordination learned through months of working side by side. Over dinner, their conversation drifted from work to more personal territories. Jun-suk spoke about growing up in the shadow of his father's restaurant empire, about choosing a different path while still honoring his family's culinary legacy. Soo-yeon found herself sharing stories about her grandmother, about learning to cook as a way of keeping memories alive. "You know," Jun-suk said as they cleaned up together, "watching you during the competition, I realized something. The way you balanced tradition and innovation in that dish, it wasn't just about cooking. It was about who you are, who you've become." Soo-yeon paused in drying a plate, the weight of his words settling over her. "What do you mean?" "You're not afraid anymore, not of judgment, not of taking risks. You've found a way to honor your past while being true to yourself." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I admire that about you. It's one of many things I admire." The air between them grew thick with possibility. Soo-yeon's heart hammered against her ribs as Jun-suk stepped closer. "Soo-yeon," he began, his voice soft, "I know we've kept things professional, but I think we both know there's something more here." The moment crystallized around them, dangerous, beautiful, terrifying. All the reasons she'd built walls around her heart rose up like smoke. The memory of abandonment, the fear of vulnerability, the risk of mixing professional and personal life. But as she looked at Jun-suk, she saw something she'd never seen with Minho, someone who understood both her passion and her pain, who had watched her fight her fears and emerge stronger. Someone who saw her complexity and celebrated it rather than trying to simplify her into what society expected. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely a whisper. "The last time I trusted someone with my heart." "I know," he said gently. "But remember what you learned in the competition? Sometimes holding too tightly to the past means missing the chance to create something new, something that honors what came before while daring to be different." Soo-yeon felt tears threatening to fall. And what if it goes wrong? What about the project, our professional relationship? What if it goes right? Jun-suk countered, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek. What if this is our chance to create our own recipe for happiness? The touch of his hand against her face broke something loose inside her, fear and hope tangling together like ingredients, waiting to be transformed into something new. She leaned into his touch, allowing herself to acknowledge what she'd been fighting for months, the possibility that love didn't have to mean losing herself, that the right person could help her become more fully who she was meant to be. Just as she began to let herself believe in this new possibility, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but something made her answer it. The voice on the other end would shatter this moment of possibility, bringing with it revelations that would force both Soo-yeon and Jun-suk to confront truths they never expected to face. The voice on the phone belonged to an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Kim, Jun-suk's grandmother. Her words came slowly, weighted with age and purpose. "I saw you on the cooking competition, dear." Your dish about generations of kimchi. It reminded me so much of your grandmother's cooking. I used to visit her restaurant in Busan, you see, before my son took over the business. Soo-yeon's hand trembled as she held the phone. Beside her, Jun-suk watched with growing concern, unable to hear the other side of the conversation, but sensing its importance from her expression. Your grandmother never told you about the connection, did she? Mrs. Kim continued. My son, Jun-suk's father, apprenticed at your grandmother's restaurant when he was young. That's where he met Minho's father. They trained together. When my son opened his own restaurant in Seoul, he brought Minho's father with him as his head chef. The pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. Minho's father had worked for Jun-suk's father. The connection was too close to be coincidental. Soo-yeon's eyes met Jun-suk's, and she saw the moment he realized something was terribly wrong. After ending the call, Soo-yeon stood in her kitchen. The space that had moments ago felt intimate now seemed to close in around her. Did you know? She asked, her voice barely steady. About Minho? About our family's connection? Confusion crossed Jun-suk's face, followed by dawning comprehension as she explained what his grandmother had revealed. No, he said firmly, reaching for her hand. I had no idea. My father passed away when I was in college, and I never knew much about his early career. But Soo-yeon had already stepped back, professional walls slamming into place. Minho's father was your father's head chef. The same Minho who left me at the altar. Your family's restaurant empire was built partly on recipes learned from my grandmother's kitchen. Her voice cracked. How can I trust that this isn't some kind of revenge or manipulation? Soo-yeon, please. Jun-suk moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Everything between us has been real. I never knew about Minho's connection to my family. I pursued the collaboration with you because of your talent, because of who you are. The evening that had held such promise now lay in fragments around them like shattered porcelain. Soo-yeon's mind raced through every interaction with Jun-suk, questioning every moment, every shared laugh in the kitchen, every gentle touch that had begun to heal her heart. I need time, she said finally, her chef's training helping her maintain composure despite the turmoil inside. I need to process this. Jun-suk stood still for a long moment, understanding in his eyes even as pain etched itself across his features. I'll respect that, he said quietly. But Soo-yeon, please remember everything we've shared. The way we work together, the trust we've built, that's real. It has nothing to do with our family's past. After he left, Soo-yeon sat alone in her kitchen until dawn, surrounded by the remains of their unfinished dinner. She pulled out her grandmother's notebook, reading between the lines of recipes for some hint of this shared history. How many other secrets lay hidden in these pages? The next few days passed in a blur of professional obligations. Soo-yeon threw herself into work at Lucille, while deliberately avoiding the Kim Foods project. Jun-suk respected her request for space, communicating only through formal business emails about necessary project details. It was during a particularly busy dinner service that clarity began to emerge. As she prepared her competition-winning kimchi dish for a guest, Soo-yeon realized something profound. Her 3 variations of kimchi hadn't just been about generations of her family. They represented the evolution of trust, of letting go while holding on to what matters. She called Mrs. Kim back, listening as the elderly woman shared more about the past. She learned how her grandmother had mentored both Jun-suk's father and Minho's father, teaching them not just recipes, but the philosophy that food should bring people together, not drive them apart. How the subsequent success of their restaurants had made her grandmother proud, not resentful. Your grandmother understood that recipes, like love, are meant to be shared, Mrs. Kim said softly. They grow stronger when passed on, not weaker. That evening, Soo-yeon sent a message to Jun-suk. Meet me at the R&D kitchen tomorrow morning. There's something I need to show you. When Jun-suk arrived, he found Soo-yeon already cooking. The familiar space that had witnessed their growing relationship now became the stage for its potential salvation. She had prepared 3 dishes, one from his father's original restaurant menu, one from her grandmother's recipe book, and one they had developed together. "Look at these dishes," she said as he sat down. "Your father took what he learned from my grandmother and made it his own. My grandmother gave freely of her knowledge because she believed good food should evolve. And what we've created together." She gestured to their joint creation. It honors both traditions while becoming something new. Jun-suk studied the dishes, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We're not our past," he said quietly. "We're what we choose to create from it." "I was afraid," Soo-yeon admitted, "that history was repeating itself, that I was being naive again. But then I realized everything about us is different." Min-ho ran from commitment.
"Jo,
"You've stood beside me, supporting my growth while pursuing your own vision. Our family's connection isn't a burden. It's proof that good things can grow from shared roots." Moving around the kitchen island, Jun-suk took her hands in his. "So where do we go from here?" Soo-yeon looked at their intertwined fingers, thinking about recipes passed down through generations, about traditions that evolved without being lost, about love that grew stronger through sharing rather than hoarding. "We write our own recipe," she said finally, a smile breaking through her tears. "One that honors the past but isn't bound by it. One that combines the best of both our traditions while creating something uniquely ours." In that moment, surrounded by the tools of their shared passion and the evidence of their combined creativity, they began to write a new chapter, not just in their personal lives, but in the continuing story of Korean cuisine. Their love, like the best recipes, would be both a preservation of tradition and an embrace of change, a dish that would only improve with time and care.